And in a sign of his continued commitment, the President is announcing that a member of his White House legal staff, known to many of you, Rashad Hussain, will serve as a special envoy to the organization of the Islamic Conference. This same spirit of partnership is needed to confront the challenge of violent extremism. And the President's approach has three main components: defeating al-Qaeda and its allies, confronting the broader challenge of violent extremism generally, and safeguarding our homeland in a manner that both protects our security as well as our values. First, defeating al-Qaeda and its allies. The President has been very clear about who we are fighting. We are not waging a war against terrorism, because terrorism is about a tactic that will never be defeated any more than the tactic of war will. Rather, such thinking is a recipe for endless conflict. We are not at war against terror, because terror is a state of mind. And as President Obama has said, as Americans, we refuse to live in fear, and we will not. Rather, we are focused on defeating and destroying al-Qaeda and its violent extremist allies. We are at war with al-Qaeda and its extremist allies, and any comment to the contrary is just inaccurate. We will destroy that organization. And that is why President Obama is responsibly ending the war in Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, and all U.S. troops will be out of Iraq by the end of next year. At the same time, the President has refocused the military mission in Afghanistan, targeting the Taliban insurgency and protecting the Afghan people, increasing training of Afghan security forces, and beginning the transfer of responsibility to those forces in summer 2011, so that American forces can begin to come home. Today, the core of al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, is seriously damaged, bloodied, and hunkered down in the tribal areas along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We've taken out key leaders and made it harder for them to move, to raise money, recruit, train, and plot their bloody attacks. We've disrupted many more plots and saved many more lives than the American public or the press will ever know. Nevertheless, al-Qaeda remains adaptive and highly resilient, with a web of affiliates distributed throughout the world in places like Yemen, where al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula took credit for the failed attack over Detroit, in Somalia and East Africa, the Sahel and North Africa, in South Asia and in Southeast Asia. So in partnership with countries around the world, we're using every tool in our toolbox to protect our country and our citizens, going after those murderers wherever they plot and train, sharing intelligence, and building the capacity of partners like Yemen to defend themselves, disrupting the financing that fuels terrorism, and working with law enforcement. At the same time, we recognize that there is no military solution to the second and larger challenge we face of violent extremism generally. This includes those upstream factors, the political and economic causes and conditions that help to fuel hatred and violence, including loss of faith in political systems to improve daily life and the vulnerability of young minds to predators like gangs and terrorist recruiters. And while poverty and lack of opportunity do not cause terrorism, it is obvious that the lack of education, of basic human services, and hope for the future make vulnerable populations more susceptible to ideologies of violence and death. Ultimately, these challenges require political and economic solutions. So in Afghanistan, we're investing in leaders who combat corruption, promote good governance, and improve basic services, including education and health. Across the border, we're partnering with the Pakistani people, investing $1.5 billion every year for 5 years to promote economic development and strengthen democratic institutions. And finally, we are doing everything in our power to protect our homeland. And just as Muslim Americans serve at every level of government, local, state, and federal, to keep our country safe, let's never forget that Muslim American citizens, you and your organizations, help keep our nation safe as well. This, too, is frequently lost in the hysteria and fear-mongering that often surrounds national security discussions. In the aftermath of the tragic murder of 13 Americans on an Army base in Texas, Muslim American organizations roundly condemned such senseless violence and in fact reached out to help and support the family of those victims. We read about arrests, such as the Lackawanna 6 in Buffalo, but forget that it was Muslim Americans, community members, religious leaders who helped bring such plots to the attention of authorities. We read about the cases, such as Somali Americans from Minnesota returning to fight in Somalia, and 5 Virginia men who went to Pakistan seeking out militancy. But let's not forget that it was concerned parents and families worried for their loved ones who frequently alerted authorities. In other words, keeping our country safe and protecting our sons and daughters from hateful ideologies demands trust and cooperation. Over the years, organizations represented here today have worked closely with our government in this regard. Going forward, I would suggest that several key principles can guide us as we meet our responsibilities to each other. First, and I believe foremost, government must fulfill its responsibilities, including protecting the rights and civil liberties of all Americans. For the President, who worked as a civil rights lawyer and as a professor of constitutional law, this is not some policy choice to be debated. These are core values and laws that must be upheld. We must remember what we're fighting for. As the President noted in his State of the Union address, the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department has returned to its founding mission, protecting civil rights and prosecuting violations. This includes the rights of Muslims, Arabs, Sikh, and South Asian Americans. For the burning of a mosque in Tennessee, several individuals will spend many years in prison. Across the country, the Justice Department has gone to court to protect the right of girls and women to wear the hijab to both school and work. And I can assure you today, the Obama administration will vigorously enforce new hate crime laws, because the United States of America, no one should ever have to hide their faith out of fear. Second, your government must listen to you. Security policies and procedures cannot be formulated in a vacuum. They must reflect the realities of the world in which they will be implemented. Law enforcement cannot lose sight of the people that it is sworn to protect and to serve. We may not always see eye to eye, and I'm sure we will have differences as we discuss these issues today. These are very difficult and complex issues, though.